The national event to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the June 16 uprising will be broadcast live on Channel 404 and SABC 1. President Jacob Zuma will address the event, which is taking place at the Orlando Stadium. For more on the June 16 commemorations, we are now joined in the studio by Lydia Maoba. She is the program coordinator from the June 16 Foundation. Lydia, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
Now, Lydia, what is the June 16 Foundation all about?
June 16 Foundation, it's about preserving the legacy of June 16, 1976, making sure that we remember what happened at the time and continuously reflecting on the relevance of that particular day into the education system, currently.
Now, speaking of what's currently happening today, does the youth of today recognize the foundations that were laid by the youth of 1976?
Yes, they do. We have youth that have, struggled against all odds to make sure that they go to school, they are educated. Some are entrepreneurs. Some are innovative. They come up with beautiful ideas every day. Again, there is a youth that is disgruntled, that is confused, that it's like it's emanating from a culture of not learning, of not reading, depending mostly on social media to inform themselves. And we're saying that at least most of the youth are eager, to learn, but it's always a question of opportunity.
I want to touch on what you just said now about some youth being confused.
Yes.
I'm youth, for example.
Yes.
And I know a lot of other youth.
Yes.
Isn't it a case of not being confused? So I wouldn't say they are confused. Maybe the struggle today is different. So the struggle has changed from what it was in 1976. Yes. We're no longer fighting against an oppressor. We're no longer fighting against a language that we don't want to be taught in. But aren't we allowed to protest in a non-violent way against the things that we are struggling with today?
Yes, you see, the youth of June 16, they used stones. They, vandalized property.
Which is why at the time, to non-violence.
Yes, at the time it was perceived as probably property that belongs to the white man.
Yes.
But today, the facilities that we have in our communities, the schools, the clinics, and so forth, government have tried to centralize all these facilities, the clinic to be next to where you live, schools next to where you live. And this confused youth, we need to develop a culture of responsibility, a culture of knowing that we own these facilities, they belong to us, and we need to protect them, because this limits continuity. If you ban a school, it needs to be rebuilt. It's the same as saying that you want continuity, you still go and fetch water with a bucket that has a hole, and when you come back you realize it has a hole, you've got to go fetch water, go back. Yeah. So we need to move forward in order to have what we want, which is a developed state.
Now, speaking of a developed state and the work that the foundation does, how important is dialogue in this context, having conversations with young people and ensuring that they also engage in those conversations?
Yes, we are trying to create, an atmosphere that will allow mental change. We come from a society of violence, and we need not to perpetuate violence at all times. We do realize that people need to be debriefed. Probably some people need to be counseled, to be told that this is not the way, to do things, so that we are able to move forward. The foundation is having a program of intergenerational dialogue, whereby the generation of 1976 interacts with the youth today. And in the dialogues, it has come up that some of the youth, they believe that, I need to make money more than I need to have a skill. I need to have a profession. And that is quite worrying. And this is because of what is, idealized out there, that if you have money, it's okay. But we need to encourage our youth to go to school and be educated.
Now, if you look at the youth of 1976, for example, and the people that struggled for our liberation, for example, so they were for building a better South Africa and making sure that the country as a whole is a better place. Yes. How do you strike that balance between the youth of today, which you say is only about maybe trying to do things for themselves, making money for themselves, and making sure that the individual is okay? How do you strike that balance between it is okay to live a prosperous life and live a great life as an individual, but also being aware that you need to take care of the society and the community that you live in, for example?
You know, striking the balance is all about, you know, the youth at the time, they took the lead. They said education after, freedom first, you know, the challenges first. And they had to deprive themselves of their youth. Some of them couldn't go to school. But today, opportunities are there, doors are open. So we can't be saying that the youth still needs to throw stones and so forth. We need to take the struggle to another level, which will make sure that at least someday we know that the very youth will be able to take care of the resources that we have in the country. They'll be able to run the country.
Now, let's look at the development of African languages. I think this topic is of great, it's a hot topic right now. A lot of people are speaking about it, you know, African content, African languages. Even in schools, it's coming up a lot. How important is that in creating and enabling the youth of today, you know, to acquire the necessary skills and the education that they need?
When you do anything, when you study with your own mother tongue, everything becomes easy. Our children today, they are faced with what you call language barrier. Even when they go to Model C schools, before you master the subject, you've got to master the language. Sometimes you'd find that even when they answer questions, it's not that they do not understand, it's because of the language. So it is you know, a challenging point that we need to look at so that we develop our language. You look at Afrikaans, for an example. Afrikaners made sure that they develop their language. You find it from grade 0 to grade 12 and even at university level. Something that is not happening with any of our African languages. So it's upon us to develop our languages. It's about our identity, our dignity, and ensuring that we are also contributing towards a good quality education.
What about leadership amongst the youth? How do we ensure that it's developed at that level to ensure that going forward, the youth is not just in a situation where they are looking for jobs, for example, but as you mentioned, you know, starting their own businesses, you know, leading real organizations that are creating jobs, that are growing our economy?
You know, sometimes leadership is always, you know, I would say it's broad. Sometimes other people perceive it in a stereotypical manner. You become sometimes a leader where you live. And it doesn't mean that you've got to have a title. You lead by making sure, by example, let's say if ever you say your student must be early at school at 8 o'clock, they're there. You know, you start that kind of campaign, guys, let's be early at school. Let's be there at 8 o'clock at school. The leadership, you know, happens in all levels, lower levels, you know, middle levels, even upper levels. So we need to redefine leadership, and we need to develop the youth to be leaders that are responsible, that are accountable, and that are able to emulate good behavior. Because the youth, most youth now are affected by drugs. The statistics, they speak every day, nyaope and all these other new drugs that are coming into being. And they need to refocus on education, because there is absolutely nothing stopping them from learning. And on the other side, again, we need to focus on the environment, the school environment, where a learner has to go and learn and where a teacher has to go and teach. If the environment, it is not conducive, it is not supportive to both the learner and the educator, and then it is a problem. And again, I think South Africa needs to debate the issue of maybe trying to make education to be an essential, you know, teaching an essential service, so that it is taken seriously.
It should be.
But it is not.
Yeah.
Yes, but we need to make it an
essential
profession.
Now, we celebrate June 16 once a year, so we commemorate this day and we celebrate the lives of, you know, the people who fought for our liberation. Now, what else does the foundation do throughout the year to ensure that the conversation continues, but also that real change is brought about in this context?
Previously, the foundation has been concentrating on, you know, preserving the legacy, making sure that June 16 is commemorated. But recently there are programs that are in place. These programs are going to ensure fighting the injustices in the education system, and to make sure that even the teachers are brought on board to try and create programs that will benefit the youth. We've got a program for teacher learner. We have a program that we are going to run for women who were there in June 16, who would also be role models for young girls that are growing up. And we also have a program for agriculture. In order, and also for career exposure. So the programs that we are going to run, we are going to run them in conjunction with the community-based organization, the schools, and even government and other stakeholders, the South African Council of Churches. And we've also started a program on bereaved families, together with the South African Council of Churches and some councillors from Wits University, where we really need to heal the source that for all the bereaved families.
Now, you mentioned a lot of the work that you do with the youth, and just before we wrap up, what's the common thread that you find amongst the youth that you interact with? So, for example, what's the one thing that the youth of South Africa have in common that you find? They
are anxious. They want to learn more. Somehow they've got more questions than answers, and I believe they still seek guidance. But you would meet children, mostly is children from disadvantaged, poor backgrounds, and most of the things that they cry about is resources for them.
Well, Lydia, you're doing some amazing work, and we're looking forward to seeing those celebrations tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining us.
It's a pleasure.
That was Lydia Maoba, Program Coordinator from the June 16 Foundation.